It's been a pretty rough week for me. It was only a 4-day work week because of Labor Day. But my allergies really attacked me. It's ragweed season here in Virginia. And I ran out of one of my medicines. So I'm relying on those homeopathic things to try to get me through. And I feel pretty good this morning. But, the heat, I was working out, putting siding on a house up above the roof line. And so I had to stand on a hot roof in the sun for most every day. And a little difficult. And I guess all those things put together, there's more that I'm going to go down the list. The hot sun, my allergies. When I heard Thursday that my friend and brother Hugh Martin had been rushed to the hospital with difficulties, that was disheartening. And then a few hours later, my youngest daughter called and she said, "Dad, I've been in a car accident." Well, it's good to hear her voice at that moment, that she's okay. And I'm thankful that Hugh is getting the care that he needs. And I know that we're continually praying for him, but I'm also thankful that God has seen fit to keep my daughter safe. And the other person involved in the accident came through it, although their vehicles were a little banged up. Also, I was talking to a gentleman this week. It might have been Thursday morning. I don't remember exactly. But we had a talk, and it was about the way God is working in the world today. And he said, I can't help but wonder about all those people born in these countries where they never hear about Jesus. You see things online and in the media today where there are children born in these countries where they're taught hate. They're taught that some people are worth so much more than others. That the people that aren't worth anything, we might as well do away with them now. And he just couldn't understand how those people would have the same opportunities to know God, the true and living God, to know Jesus Christ, his Son, like we do here in a free country. And how that it would be possible for those people to make a decision about God in their lives. And he was questioning all those things. And I guess with my allergies, with the hot sun, with all these things, it just was very difficult for me. I didn't have a lot of patience at that point, because my first reaction was to say, "You're kidding me. You can't see how a God who created everything can be a righteous judge of everyone in their own situation." And so, needless to say, I couldn't identify with this person I was talking with. But we talked through it, and he had some thoughts that I understood, and I shared some things that I understood with my personal experience with him. And we came to the understanding that if we believe in a creator God revealed by the scriptures, by the miraculous scriptures that we hold in our hands today, if we believe that he created everything around us that we know and understand, that we have to have faith that when he tells us he is the righteous judge through his only begotten Son, that he's going to judge us in a way that is going to allow us the freedom to eliminate the doubts in our lives, to eliminate the things that creep up every now and then that give us pause. And so I'm thankful for what God has given me in a witness this week. I'd like you to open your Bibles to the beginning. To Genesis. I just want to look for a minute at a few things here in Genesis. Think about Adam and Eve in the garden, in the perspective of what I've just shared with you today. We've all got problems. We all have doubts about how things are going to work out in our own lives according to God's will. If I'm going to be saved, God's got to do a pretty big work in my life. Think about Adam and Eve and what they had to think about before it came time for them to make a choice. Do you think there was any doubt in their mind that God had created them and placed them in this beautiful garden? Do you think there was any doubt in their minds that God had married them together? The two have become one flesh? I really don't think so. I really think that there was no doubt whatsoever. That's an interesting thought to us, isn't it? Really, what I thought about for the message this week, it came into focus with me. The thing that Satan introduced at its very basic level into the lives of Adam and Eve there at the tree of knowledge of good and evil was doubt. Doubt about really everything that God had told them. Did he really create them? Was he holding something back from them? Could they really trust him? All those things came in because Satan introduced them first into the mind of Eve. And then, when they ate the fruit, wow, there was a change that came over them. Something happened. They knew something was different. So now all the doubts flood in. Do you think Satan left them alone after he tempted Eve at the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Do you think he just, I'll just leave them alone for a few years. They can just deal with the place that they've chosen for themselves? No. I think Satan had access to their minds right away because of the choice that they both made. So when we look in Genesis chapter 3, and we see the excuses that first the man is coming up with. Hey, look, God, you gave me this woman. It's her fault. Do you think that's something that came into his own mind? Or do you think probably there was a pretty good temptation to say that to God? And then when it comes to the woman, look at the excuse she made. She points to the serpent. Do you think that was a thing that came from her own mind? Or do you think the doubt was there, placed in her mind as a temptation by Satan? So what's God trying to do right away? Well, in verse 15, he's trying to give us all a promise, not only Adam and Eve. He gives the first promise and the prophecy of the Bible, really, about how there's going to come this time when doubt is going to be met with something that's greater than that doubt. That's really what it's all about. I mean, what can God do at that point? If they doubt the very fact that what he said is true, what could he possibly say that they would believe unconditionally? God is going to have to do something in the human race that shows his unconditional love to us. That's really what's going to have to take place. And what's going to have to take place with that is that it's going to have to be something that we don't work for, that we don't deserve. It's going to have to be something from God's heart. And when we look at the whole of Scripture, to me, God is trying to get across those principles to all of us, starting at the very beginning with Adam and Eve. He's trying to remove the doubt from our hearts and minds that He is who He says He is, that He's pure love, that He has our best interest at heart, and He's honest and straightforward with all of His creation. That's called removing all the doubt. Right away, He makes provision for them. Because in the 21st verse of here in Genesis 3, He gives them the covering. I know we've talked about the phrase naked and afraid this week in Prophecies of Hope. Come to find out, that's a reality show that's on TV. But that's the point. Adam and Eve were naked and afraid in the garden. They didn't know who or what to believe. And they were in a position of extreme vulnerability. So God gives them what they need. First of all, He gives them a promise that He's going to provide everything that they need to get out of this situation that He didn't choose for them, but they chose for themselves. He gives them a promise that hopefully can take care of their fear. And along with that promise comes the point that He clothes them with skins in verse 21. So are they naked and afraid anymore? Well, it can be up to them. But they can choose what God has given them. They can choose to take those doubts out of their minds because of the evidence that God has put in its place. The evidence that someday He's going to provide the salvation that they need. That's the promise and the skins. Well, the title of my presentation this morning is A Second Chance. A second chance not only for Adam and Eve, but for everyone. And really what I'm trying to say is, as a human race, we had the first chance there in the Garden of Eden. We did. And even though I wasn't there, I think God created the very best that He could to choose at that time. So I can't say that I would make any better or different choice than Adam and Eve did, especially with the sinful tendencies that I have today. So we all chose. We really did. And the second chance we have is provided by God Himself. That's interesting, isn't it? It's not a second chance that we make on our own. The things that we do, the plan that we might come up with, as good as it may be. It's a second chance of God's own providing. And what has God been trying to teach us all through the Scripture? He's been revealing to us about this second chance that we're in right now. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 22. We're going to take a look at some of these things, especially in Old Testament Scripture, where God is revealing His plan of salvation, this second chance to us. Genesis chapter 22 talks about Abraham. And in this particular account, he's been asked to do something very strange by God. He's been asked to offer up his only son, Isaac. The only son of promise. It's an interesting thing when we study about it. Would God actually ask for a blood sacrifice from a human being? Would He ask for us to sacrifice our own? When you think about that, God has sacrificed His own for the sake of all of us. In verse 7, Isaac, Abraham's son, asked the question, where is the lamb? Where is the lamb that we need for the sacrifice? Genesis 22:7, and Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, my father, he said, here am I, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering. What is God trying to teach us? Well, in Abraham's day, the true Lamb of God was not manifest yet. But in verse 8, Abraham has an answer. Don't you think it was an answer of faith? Do you think it was an answer of no doubt inside of him? Verse 8, Abraham said, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering." So they went, both of them, together up on the mount. And if you turn over to verse 13, we have read, and I'm sure you have heard this story many times. In verse 13, God does provide, not only immediately, but overall in the plan of salvation, the lamb for himself, for us. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his own son. God's trying to teach us. He's trying to teach us about belief and understanding that he's got it all covered for us. It takes choosing on our own part. It takes that choice to believe what he has to say. But he's really trying to get rid of the one thing that the devil has stuck into this whole equation, and that is the doubt that we have. Let's turn over to Exodus chapter 13. And this is the account where Moses is leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. These are God's chosen people. Honestly, I don't know why, but they are God's chosen people. Sometimes we look at the accounts of the things that they said and that they did, the things that were in their hearts, and it's just hard for us to understand why God was so patient with them. And then take a look at what's in our hearts, and then sometimes it's hard for me to understand why God is so patient with me. He's trying to bring to the children of Israel the point where they will believe him. They'll believe that God has their best interest in heart, that he's going to take care of them no matter what happens. And in Exodus 13, verse 31, 13, verse 21, he gives them a sign of his very presence with them. I think if I had a pillar of fire over my car wherever I drove every day, I wouldn't doubt that God was going to keep me safe. But here it says, "And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them by the way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night." Wow, they could travel in the night or in the day. I hadn't realized that before. But this was a tremendous example of God's power and care over them. A tremendous example. I know I wasn't there. I don't know for sure. I'd like to say that I would look at that and just have faith that God was looking out for me, one of his children. But I understand that in the place where my heart has been in the past, it's hard for me to say that I could believe God just at face value and not have any doubt at all. God tried to teach them even more about his whole plan of salvation. We turn over to Exodus 25 and verse 8. God asked them to do something. He asked them to do something that's going to teach them more about God's whole plan for them. The whole plan that's going to remove all of the doubt. And in Exodus 25, verse 8, he says, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." And when they get started on this sanctuary, I don't know what they realized, that the thing that they were building physically out there in the desert was, if they paid attention, could teach them about the whole plan of salvation. You know, this sanctuary had a courtyard around it. And it was made, because they were in the desert, just of the things that they had on hand. They had wood, they had brass and silver and gold, and they had cloth and all these materials. But God was trying to teach them the principles through this sanctuary of all of the plan of salvation. The outer courtyard, it had a barrier between what we would call the regular camp or the outside world and where the sacrifice would take place. And this barrier, from my understanding, was high enough where a tall man might be able to see over it, but you could never take a run. The average man could never take a run and jump over it. You had to go through the door. Well, we know in John 10:17 that Christ says that He is the door. That's very interesting. If the Israelites would have paid attention to that, they could have understood that a door was provided for them. It wasn't by their own way that they were going to get to the place where they could have their sins forgiven and righteousness applied on their account. There's no way that an average man could jump over this wall of the courtyard. And it's my understanding that every so often there was a post or some structure that held up this wall of the courtyard. And it was made out of wood, but it was layered in silver. And my understanding is each one of those posts it took 30 pieces of silver to overlay one of those posts. And in Jewish tradition, and of course we know this from the account of the purchase that the Pharisees and the religious leaders made to Judas, they paid 30 pieces of silver for Jesus to be betrayed. It was considered the price of a man, this 30 pieces of silver. In everything we saw in the sanctuary, it taught us about this plan of salvation that God has for us. In the courtyard, the sacrifice was made. We see the sacrifice of Jesus Christ there in the courtyard. In the two places in the sanctuary, the holy place and the most holy place. In the holy place, we find the bread of life. We find the Spirit of the Father and Son there in the holy place. And so we understand that it taught that after the sacrifice out in the courtyard, if we could just make it into that holy place, that it applied to the sanctification or the cleansing of our hearts and our minds. One day a year, the high priest would go into the most holy place, which would represent the holiest of all in the very presence of God Himself. And in that place, after we've had the justification in the courtyard, the sanctification on the holy place, we could find the glorification that someday we will have when we're face to face with our Creator. It's a beautiful thing. In fact, there's many lessons for us to learn today by understanding the sanctuary and its service. And it was all to help us to understand God more so that the doubt in our minds about who He is, what He represents, the love that He has for us, the way that He's made for us, those doubts can be taken away. Now I'd like you to turn your attention to the book of Daniel. It's nearer the end of the Old Testament, I would say. I believe God has used the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation to put in people's hearts here in the last days things that are overwhelming evidences that he still cares about us, that he wants that doubt to be removed, that he wants a holy people to believe who he is and what he said is true. I'd like to turn your attention to Daniel 1 and verse 8. This is an interesting text. Mary and I were talking about it this week. This is the account in the first chapter of Daniel about Daniel and his three friends. We know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But those were their Babylonian names. They have names that were given them from their Jewish parents or Israelite parents: Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And those names are not insignificant. Here Daniel says in verse 8 that he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat or with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. And Mary and I were talking about the significance of this verse and how it relates to the rest of Daniel. What does that mean for us today? Do we have a health message here at the end of time? Do we not only want to not defile ourselves with the physical things that we could eat or drink that defile ourselves, but with the spiritual meat and the spiritual wine that the rest of the world seems to want so desperately? You know, these three friends of Daniel had a test that was placed upon them. And this is a very interesting test because it's a mirror, I believe, of the test for God's people at the end of time. You know, in Daniel chapter 3, after Nebuchadnezzar's vision in Daniel 2, of course Nebuchadnezzar thinks that he's going to circumvent the prophecy of God himself, and he's going to build this image, and he's going to have all the people in his realm worship this image that he builds. And, you know, this is not unlike Revelation chapter 14, where at the end of time we see this image erected, and all the people in the whole world are instructed to worship this image or be under the penalty of death. That's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar was setting up at his time. So Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they were there in the Babylonian kingdom. They were instructed at the proper time, you kneel and you worship this particular God. So not only what to worship, but when to worship. And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. Praise the Lord that they wouldn't do it. In verse 12 it says, "There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up." Is there going to be a group of people at the end of time who will not worship this image that is set up? There will be. You know, in these things, God is trying to tell us that He's got it all figured out for us. He really does. He wants all these doubts about how things are going to go at the end of time, about these horrible last plagues. Are we going to be involved in those things? Are we going to be kept from those things? Are we going to be taken out of the way so those things don't affect us? Look, God's got it figured out for us. He wants the doubt to be removed. And He's showing us that He knows the end from the beginning. He's got a master plan. You know, I looked up something interesting about these three Hebrews. They each have a name that was given them not only at birth, but when they got to Babylon, their names were changed. Well, does what their names mean have any correlation to maybe these people at the end of time that refuse to bow to the image set up? And I wrote these things down if I can find them in my notes. Hananiah, and apply these in your mind to the end of time, when we're asked to stand up for what is right, with no doubt. Hananiah, his name means God has favored. Is God going to favor the people at the end of time? He is. He's going to give them the power to do away with these doubts. Not only has He given them the power, and He will give us the power, but He has favored us with knowledge and understanding that we can look back in Bible times and say, not everyone has had the knowledge and understanding that we have today. God has favored. Mishael means who is what God is. Now that may be a little confusing. Who is what God is? Mishael, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they stood up for what was right. In other words, they have the character, an imprint of the character of God. In other words, their character was godlike, or Christ-like, we might say, because our example is Christ Jesus, leading us to the one true God. Azariah, his name means Jehovah has helped. Jehovah, the one true God, has helped. Can we apply that to the end time people? Absolutely we can. That no matter what situation that we find ourselves, if we put our hope and trust in Jesus Christ, we know that the power of our Heavenly Father comes through His Son, Jesus Christ. Jehovah has helped. You know, all these things come back to the one principle of removing doubt about who God is and what He says is true. You know, in John chapter 14, Jesus reveals to us that He is the way, the truth, and the life. John 14:6. He's the way to what? Whose truth? And life? Don't we all have life already? Well, I think Christ wants us to look past what we would think the obvious things are. And He wants us to understand that He is the way that God has set up for salvation. He is the truth that transcends everything the world has said is really the truth. And you know, in the Son is the life of the Father. The way, the truth, and the life. Psalm 16 verse 25 says, there is a way that seems right to a man. To the average man, there's a way that seems right. But in that same verse it says, in the end, it leads to destruction. So the way in Christ Jesus is definitely different than what the average man thinks is the right way. At Jesus' trial, Pilate asked an interesting question. Pilate was the ruler, the Roman ruler there at that time. And in his interaction with Jesus, Jesus mentioned the word truth. And Pilate shot back, what is truth? The interesting thing is that he didn't wait for an answer from Jesus. His point is that how do we know that the truth is the truth? I think God has been trying to reveal those things to us from the Garden of Eden. In John 8:32, in fact, I want to look that up and read that word for word. John chapter 8 and verse 32 is Jesus speaking. He says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The promise is that we can know Jesus Christ, who is the truth. And by the blood of Jesus Christ and the life of Jesus Christ, we can truly be free from the bonds of sin that are around us. My closing text this morning, I'm right on time. It's 1 minute till 12. Is Romans chapter 10. And I'm going to read starting in verse 8. "But what saith it? The word is nigh thee, even in your mouth and in your heart." That is the word of faith, which we preach. "If you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus, and shall believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. For with the heart man believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the scripture says, whosoever believes on him shall not be ashamed." God wants all of us to believe what he has said. When we believe with our hearts, then our actions follow suit. And sooner or later, it'll become the righteousness of God in us. It says, with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. Confession is like the man who said, "Master, I believe. Please help my unbelief." So today, I ask you, have you really talked to God about your unbelief? Have you talked to God about your doubts? Have you talked to God about everything that you can see? Me included. The things that I can see just in my limited vision that I need help with. Today, I would encourage you to talk to God about these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Talk about your doubts and fears. Be honest with him, because the one thing he wants out of your life is the doubt that he can do the work in your heart.